in terms of background of the new normal, it's just kind of a discussion of, as we were going forward back in sort of the shutdown months, and now we're in stage 3, it feels like we've come so far. And as we've gone on, even beyond COVID, we've seen other pretty momentous cultural changes as well begin to happen across the world. So yeah, it's really just kind of a conversation on whether it is business, whether it's small business, whether it's global, macro, whether it's trends, whether it's maybe even deeper, more societal or cultural issues. What will be the new normal, and what are the changes that we're looking at? Obviously, it's a pretty weighty question, so we try to keep the conversations as casual as possible. So don't feel like we need to drop nuggets of gold that are definitive and concrete going forward, but just kind of producing a general sense of insight and ease as we go forward.
Awesome, perfect. And then I think from here, we're all set to introduce our speakers, our panelists. Okay, so I guess I could start with Tanya. Tanya Rumble is a fundraising leader who has raised millions for some of Canada's largest charities, including Heart and Stroke Foundation, the Canadian Cancer Society, and now McMaster University. She graduated with an HBA Political Science from McMaster University and earned a master's certificate at NYU in Marketing Communications, and has completed numerous professional certificates, including Not-for-Profit Governance Essentials and Truth and Reconciliation through Right Relations. Additionally, she's an active leadership volunteer in the philanthropy and nonprofit sector. She is an executive member of the CAGP, Golden Horseshoe Chapter, board of director and chair of the HR committee with Find Help Information Services, operators of 211 Toronto, leadership volunteer with AFP Toronto Chapter and the AFP Canada Foundation. And as a racialized philanthropy professional, Tanya is honored to share her influence and insights with students, emerging professionals, and peers in the sector. She regularly authors articles on the topic of inclusion, diversity, equity, and access and fundraising, as well as other topics in industry publications. And she speaks to professional audiences at learning events like AFP Congress, webinars, and etc. In addition to sharing her knowledge, she's committed to lifelong learning and is a graduate of the 2017 Association of Fundraising Professionals Inclusion and Philanthropy Fellowship. That's a mouthful. And 2010 Diverse City Fellowship, and has been certified fundraising executive since 2017, and most recently completed her Master's Financial Advisor Philanthropy in April 2020, as well as was approved to take the certification exam for the Communication Management Professional designation through International Association of Business Communicators. And Tanya lives in Hamilton with her husband and her new infant son, Clark. And congratulations on becoming a new mom. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Brad and Ryan, for inviting me to participate in this conversation with Geoff. I'm really looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Great. And then we have Geoff. So Geoff's mission is to enhance the performance and profitability of family-run businesses. Over the last 10 years, Geoff has consulted with over 30 family-run SMEs, helping his clients double or triple in size with a focus on sales, strategy, and implementation. Geoff works with business owners and their sales teams to help reposition the company's strategy, train or retrain sales teams, and then roll up his sleeves and grow the business. Geoff's direct experience in energy, financial services, manufacturing, retail, and not-for-profit sectors, to name a few. However, one of his greatest learning outcomes has been and continues to be the contextual trends within the SME space, regardless of company size, ownership structure, or industry. Understanding and navigating these trends is what Geoff correlates to the success of his engagements in his clients' organizations. At the end of the day, everything comes back to people. Geoff's latest engagement was in the energy sector, where he brought over $100 million in new business revenue and $15 million in private equity to his client's organization. In his free time, Geoff volunteers at Hillfield Strathballen College, where he is a member of the Board of Governors and a chair of the Board of Trustees. He lives in Burlington with his wife and their son Hudson, and he also has other news related to that, I believe.
Yeah, we've had another little guy coming in November.
Hey, congratulations.
Yeah, super excited. Thank you.
I feel like this is Oprah. You get a baby, you get a baby, you get a baby.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Congratulations, both of you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Very cool. Okay, so let's kick things off. As always, we typically start with more broad, overreaching questions. In line with that tradition, we'll do that as well today. So we'll start off by asking the two of you, what broad behavioral changes have you seen trending as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? And how do you see these trends affecting business operations in the short term as well as the long term? So either of you want to pick that up? That would be great.
Sure, I can kick things off. I am not, fully entrenched in the workforce at the moment as I am on maternity leave, but I am I continue to do some leadership volunteer work as well as doing some work with some other charities while I'm quote unquote off. And I think that maybe is a bit of a trend. We are seeing a lot of people who are feeling forced to make decisions about whether or not they can remain in the workforce as they juggle familial responsibilities, whether it's caring for elderly family members or children, or sharing responsibilities of caregiving with other members of their family. I think that the nature of work, the dynamic nature of work, and the flexibility, I think, is a huge trend. So I myself being at home while my husband's also working from home and having a little one here, I don't think it's going to look all that different when I quote unquote go back to work. I think it's going to look very similar, where we're going to have to juggle these competing priorities. And I think that I see a long-term view. We're going to have to start bringing our whole selves to work. I think some really positive work cultures were already flexible, really agile, and allowed their staff and their teams to work in multiple contexts, whether it was working from home, hot desking, having a permanent workspace, or working out of multiple offices or co-working spaces, as well as needing to take time in the middle of the day to go to medical appointments or pick up their sick children or do whatever it is that they needed to do. I think the really successful work cultures were already doing that. And now I think so many work cultures are being forced to confront that people really are whole and dynamic. They're not just employees. They're not just workers. And I think I could speak to the philanthropic and the fundraising sector. I think that there was this real mentality that when you're physically there, you're working. And that's probably not that different than a lot of other sectors, but there was this real resistance to work from home, this idea that you need to be visible to be productive. And I think now what we're seeing is that donors don't really want to meet in person with people anymore because it's not really a risk worth taking when someone's asking you for money. And so I think a really positive thing is figuring out new ways of working, new ways of building relationships, but ultimately for employees themselves and people who are going to be able to remain in the workforce, and organizations that are going to be able to retain their talent throughout this pandemic, which frankly could go on for months, if not years longer. Are the ones that are going to be flexible and open to seeing that people have so many things going on in their lives. And ultimately, if they feel supported and they can work in flexible and dynamic ways, they can get their results should speak for themselves.
Yeah, you hit so many great points just in that one section. And there are a few things there that I'm actually surprised haven't come up until now. This is our fourth session, and we've talked about interpersonal relationships with employees and team culture and that kind of thing, but we haven't talked about family. We haven't talked about, as you said, approaching teams and employees as whole and complete people. And I love that. And I think you hit on a few other really great points as well, but I would love to get Geoff's thoughts on that as well. Finding out that you're going to be a new parent soon and having that balance, it'll be interesting to hear your perspective on that as well.
Yeah. So it was interesting when COVID hit. We have a home daycare where we send our son, and she called us and she said, this whole concept of socially isolating, she says, I tend to do that as part of my everyday. Which was a bit of a relief because there was two families in education and one family in the medical field. So she says, if you want to keep sending your son, if you feel comfortable, feel free. I have no idea how, people work from home, parent from, teach, you're almost wearing 3 or 4 different hats. And I've talked to a few friends that, somebody will do the morning shift and somebody will do the afternoon shift and vice versa. I think though that a lot of companies have been forced to adapt. And this new normal, if there's a dog that pops up in the background, well, that's okay. So yeah, I appreciate the flexibility of the employer for the employees. And then also this notion of a gig economy. I take on certain projects for certain periods of time. I don't ever have, one company that I'm working with. I just get bored just based on my general personality. So I think, the economy might shift more so to subject matter experts that come in for specific projects and then exit and work on the next thing. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that it's really great that has come up, because I think that is something that is the cornerstone of our lives, is our family, right? Our family is who keeps us grounded, who keeps us together, when we're having tough weeks and all that other kind of stuff. It's the center of our universe. And I think that for a very long time, we've been so distracted by so many outside factors, and we spend so much time. It's been said quite a bit that you spend more time with the people you work with than your own family, and it's been that way for a very long time. And I think it's been very interesting to see the effect that this has had. When I joked to my wife a little while ago. We were a month into the pandemic, and I'm working from home. We've got family activities and all this stuff, and I look around and I go, I really like our house. And we've been here for 4 years, but I only ever see it in the dark when I get home late from work. And I'm like, I really like our kids. I really like you. And it's been an interesting shift in the things that have value in our life.
Yeah. I was wondering, actually, kind of a devil's advocate thing there, Tanya, actually, and then you can go on with what you say. Is, you had kind of mentioned, I completely agree with the, working from home and that sort of remote working. We need to have that flexibility around it, and you need to kind of defy those expectations that you have to be in the office. And wearing two hats. One of the hats is always particularly about kind of you need to be in the office. That said, I do get why, especially in that context, where sometimes the productivity or the things that you can get done just in casual conversations across a room or across a hall, I think is something that I've missed the most maybe across the past couple months. Do you have thoughts on how that gap gets closed a bit?
Yeah, I think technology can enable us in a lot of ways. I don't think it's the only answer, but it's an enabler. And I think you need to think about the kinds of collaboration that you want to cultivate. And I think that's really intentional and part of an organization's culture and modus operandi. And I think that I totally agree with you, Ryan. I'm a person, I really like being in the office. I like to work from home occasionally, but I really enjoy the in-person collaboration and connecting with people on the fly and the sort of things that come up by happenstance. And I think you just need to more intentionally create those opportunities to connect. And it takes more time and effort. But what I worry about is if there's this rush for people to have to return to the office. I think those that will be most able to do so are those who will have the most privilege, those who have childcare in place, those who maybe don't have families, or are single and have vehicles of their own and don't rely on public transit to get to and from work. They might not feel safe taking public transit during this time. And I worry about how those folks will feel the pressure to return to the office. For working parents, they might feel like they're putting themselves at risk, but they feel like if they're not there and they're not visible and they're not making those connections and collaborating in person, that they're going to be missing out on those opportunities for greater success, greater integration in projects, greater opportunities for leadership. So I definitely think that there's a real value, and I don't think that we should just completely shift away from working in offices and having in-person collaboration. But I worry about those who feel like they can't do that right now, and making sure that there's equitable ways for everyone to plug in and collaborate in the ways that feel safe and comfortable for them.
Yeah.
The other thing that came to my mind was this urgency around change. Like, I don't know about the work cultures that anyone else on this call participates in, but Greg and I know each other through the fundraising sector. And, I don't know too much about the UVic and where he worked before at the hospital system in Victoria. But universities, for example, tend to be big ships that take a lot of effort to move in different directions. And the change of pace is not easy when you have to bring so many people on board. And I think there's real value to making sure that there's that buy-in. But we've had to change in such fast ways and with this urgency that I think is really kind of invigorating and exciting. I don't think it's all been done perfectly, but it's just exciting to see what is possible when we're required to make adjustments to the way we work, and how, I think that the way in which we collaborated for everyone to get themselves set up to work from home is a good example of the kinds of urgency that perhaps we need to turn to. How do we continue to enable that kind of nimbleness in collaboration that you were speaking to, Ryan?
Mm-hmm. It's almost like in one sense, necessity is the mother of invention, but urgency is the is able to disable or cut the red tape, right? A little bit. Mm-hmm. So it's been, I definitely think it's been interesting to see a lot of that over the course of these past few months. And also we've spoken about that a little bit with regards to the leeway that people will give you. Because we all remember the YouTube video or, whatever of the BBC correspondent, and, his child walks through in the background when he's on a video call, and the nanny runs after the child, and it's all this big, expose, now it's just like, that's every day, and that's fine. And I love the fact that it's fine now, if nothing else, going back to your earlier point, Tanya, like, we're appreciating people as complete people now. And we're appreciating that you can still be effective, in these kinds of situations. One other thing that that you had mentioned that I thought was a really great point is, and I wanted to put a little bit of a spin on it. You had mentioned that a lot of people feel that you have to be in the office to be productive. I feel that in my background, I also used to work at McMaster University, and I've worked in very corporate environment, and in very corporate private environment, private sector, they didn't care if you were effective or not. They cared if your butt was in the seat. Mm-hmm. This is our time. We're paying you for this time. If there's no work to be done, it doesn't matter to me. You're here till 4:59, because you owe us, your soul in that time, and I think that, a lot of that is starting to change as well. There are certainly a lot of hardships, but I appreciate that a situation like this has opened up to better thinking when it comes to those things.
Mm-hmm. I wondered, Geoff, with kind of your role and the roles you've taken on in the past, where you kind of do flexibility is sort of built into your role. Have you seen much of a change there, or has it actually been you're kind of like come to the dark side?
Yeah. So from a more corporate perspective, I think that, just taking a step back here for a second, there's companies that are playing defense and companies that are playing offense. And, when sales drop dramatically as a function of a global pandemic, I think a lot of companies, will just hold back on their purse strings and, cut outside help or, marketing campaigns or what have you. But then there's other companies that will dig in and spend a little bit of money and then reap the benefits down the road. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think companies, it really depends on culture and the mindset of the leadership team. But the other thing that I was going to say from a comment, I think, Brad, that you made. So, and Tanya, I'm very much like, getting in front of people, talking to people, it's now like elbows or whatever, but the handshakes and all that kind of stuff, the water cooler conversations, I really appreciate. I'm in sales and I'm trying to build relationships with people, and it's been very challenging, but it's also been kind of this paradox where people are way more open to, you know, their home environment, talking about family and talking about sort of more vulnerable challenges that they're up against when, you know, you're on a sales call. So it's been very different to see the types of conversations. It's less about the product or service, I think, and you can really genuinely say, you know, hey, how's it going? Like, are you okay? Like, you know, you've got children, how are you working through it? So it's been an interesting way of building relationships with people. So yeah, coming back to your earlier question, Ryan, I think, you know, culturally it depends on the organization, but some organizations that aren't willing to change or whatnot, you know, will they last, right?
Yeah.
So
actually, I mean, with that, I know we're kind of organically questioning here, but returning maybe a bit to the list, but kind of organically going on. One of the questions sort of that we always have on the list is the Mother of Invention question. And it's the one I really like, of like the necessity is the mother of invention, and how has this world kind of maybe produced innovations. And I was really fascinated, Tanya, by something you said about related to kind of philanthropic relationship building. I mean, that in-person relationship building and prospecting and kind of, you know, getting to that eventual asking point is so essential. You were saying, you know, from a donor perspective, obviously they're not as interested in that sort of in-person personal contact right now. So what would you say has sort of been the invention or the innovation there of how you begin to deal with that, or how you see philanthropic giving shifting?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say actually not on the individual side, but one of the things that I see that's been incredible is that we have these like very well-established foundations in Canada, and they have very specific ways of granting. It takes a very long time to build a relationship with the folks at those organizations, and then you might be invited to put in a proposal for some funding, and then might be successful in receiving a multi-year grant. And these organizations tend to be historic, tend to be, you know, again, not the fastest moving ships, some of which are family foundations. So they make decisions in familial ways. So again, not easy to change, right? You've got a legacy there that you're contending with. And I've been really, really heartened to see that they've responded to this urgent need for support related to COVID, whether it's supporting or healthcare organizations or general community organizations that have been impacted by COVID. I mean, everyone's been impacted by COVID, but in terms of their direct provision of service. So I found that to be really, really incredible, this way that this pandemic has created this groundswell of support. And like, you know what, we're going to have to like sort of throw out the old playbook of how we typically grant and give out funds. And we're going to need to make funds urgently available to those who need it. And I think that's been super incredible to see the kind of innovation that's gone into how do we get quick grant applications together so it doesn't take someone months and months and months to put together an application because they need the money now. But there needs to be, of course, accountability in that. But on the flip side, something that I do notice that I'm not as heartened by is that there isn't that same sort of urgency and that nimbleness and responsiveness to funds to other causes. So, you know, if we think about the pandemic as like this sort of health related thing that unfortunately is impacting on class and racial lines, we're not seeing that same sort of fervor and responsiveness to things like anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous racism. I don't think we've seen organizations say we're willing to throw out our typical playbook and support organizations that are doing work to combat racism in Canada, for example. Right. So, you know, what matters to who? And, you know, everyone sees that the pandemic is sort of, it's impacting everyone in Canada, but not impacting everyone equally. And, you know, I would like to think that everyone would believe that racism impacts everyone, but I don't think everyone believes that racism impacts them if they're not directly being impacted by it. So some positives there, and then some negatives where I think we still have some work to do to address some things that are maybe a little bit more uncomfortable. It's easy to say, how are you doing? How's your health? Are you well? Has anyone in your family been impacted by COVID? But it's as easy to say to someone, that's racialized, how are you doing with the Black Lives Matter movement, or an Indigenous person? How is anti-Indigenous racism in Canada impacting you and your family, and how are you coping, and how do you, so I think we have a deeper level of conversation to have with people. And if we can just sort of take a little bit of what we learned from COVID and what Geoff was saying in terms of having these more vulnerable conversations with people, let's take it even deeper, and bring that into our work environments as well.
Mm-hmm.
So follow up to that, because I think this is a great conversation. It's something that's come up a couple times through these sessions, and it's important. And so follow up to that. I'm wondering, with your experience and with being privy to the changes that have happened with certain aspects of giving, is there anything that we can draw from that or learn from that in order to transition that over to other areas of giving, or other areas of even just consideration from a social standpoint, to influence those behaviors, to influence the process, and make positive change for those types of difficult and equally important challenges that we have?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest one would be reduce those barriers. Like, I mean, if you can think about someone who, like an organization, like say a community organization that serves like vulnerable people, and how they would typically apply for funding for their programming. It might be a 4-month cycle of like from initial application to actually receiving the money, the first set of money, and then another 3 to 6 months before receiving the second set of money, and then reporting every 3 months on how they've used that money and the kind of results that they've got. We've seen in the philanthropic sector that organizations and individual donors have given a lot more flexibility to be like, we know you need to do the work. You've already demonstrated that your impact and your mission, it was relevant before, but it's even more relevant now. We trust in our relationship with you that you can deliver what is needed when it's needed and how it's needed now. You will figure out sort of as it goes along where you're going to disperse those funds. We kind of understand general purposes, and we believe that you're accountable, and we'll report back on how those funds have been used and the impact that it's created. Let's try and do that more for other things, like if there are groups, small groups that are doing amazing things when it comes to, let's say, working with racialized young people, reduce some of those barriers, give them a small bit of seed funding to give them the opportunity to demonstrate their efficacy, impact, and accountability, and then build that trusting relationship from there. But if we have all these barriers to entry for, some of the social causes and the organizations that are on the ground doing that work, we'll never be in a position to compete for those philanthropic dollars.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds to me like, a potential solution to that is to really focus in on drawing the parallels between the criteria that was a catalyst for people to break down those barriers and cut the red tape quicker. Draw the parallels between that criteria and the criteria over here that is just as dire, that is just as important. So it sounds to me like there's opportunity. It sounds to me like people responded in a way that was helpful, under duress, and made things happen quickly. It sounds to me like if there is a parallel drawn to race issues and the dire need of making sure that everybody is safe and everybody is accounted for and taken care of, that there's real potential for positive change.
Definitely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. One thing that, so a little bit off topic, I'm not Mr. Smooth Segue like Ryan is, so, but a little bit of off topic, but one thing that I really like asking in these calls is talking about different innovations that we've seen. And we've talked about how the landscape of workflow and business and interpersonal relationships and that kind of thing has all changed dramatically. I'm interested to hear from both of you what sort of innovations or technologies or processes, procedures have you seen change to adapt to those things? To, like, Geoff, when you were talking earlier about building interpersonal relationships, in some ways has been more difficult from a technical standpoint, but in other ways has been better because you're able to have more open personal conversations with people while we're all in this together. I'd be interested to see what innovations, processes, procedures you guys have seen come through over the past 5 months that have been great during this time, but have also have potential to carry on and continue to be a benefit.
Yeah, that's a good question. So at Hillfield, where I'm on the board, literally they took the entire business model from being in person to being remote. And just talking about that for a few seconds, like to be able to transition a business model, to me, it might sound very simple, but understanding what happened behind the scenes and offering different solutions, to me, it was just fantastic. I've said over and over again to the leadership team, I commend you for the efforts. Sort of the opposite side of that, because you're asking about innovation and change. I think this pandemic has forced a lot of people to kind of catch up. And so, there might be those, like the 1% or the 5%ers that are thinking, okay, how can we be opportunistic with this current situation and, potentially leverage, create change, go to the hotel style offices. But I think for me, and just based on who I'm talking to and working with, I think it's really forced certain organizations to catch up. So if it's, Zoom or what have you, just being a little bit more flexible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think piggybacking on what Geoff said, where he was sitting from the vantage point of being someone who's governing Hillfield Strathallan. Similarly, I'm on the board of Find Help Information Services, which is the gateway for community and social services. In Toronto, you call 211 and you can get anything from a referral to a food bank to mental health supports and everything in between that would fall under community and social services. And as a board, I think we were a small and nimble board to begin with, but our ability to respond to the needs of management and the questions and the decision making has been exponential. Like, the things that would take us months before, we've simply instituted bi-weekly touch bases to simply keep up to date on the rate of change and the new programs and activities that the organization was undertaking. And it completely upended our way of governing. We already had really strong governance practices, but it just allowed us to respond to the needs of management and to be supportive of what they were going through on a day-to-day basis in a big way. And I think that gave us a little bit more insight into maybe what the day-to-day before COVID looked like, and to be a little bit more, frankly, empathetic, supportive in general. And so I think we'll continue to govern in that way and with that lens well after things calm down, and who knows when that will be. But I think that that's allowed us to be a little bit more insightful and to have a little bit more foresight in terms of what the organization might need, and just to be responding in a way that's a little bit more organizational centric than board centric, and like what worked for us with our monthly meetings and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I like that.
I'm just curious, Tanya, I have a question for you, just to throw everybody through a loop here.
Yeah.
So there's three moderators now.
Yeah. No, but it's fascinating. Like, it's such a fascinating case study to look at decision making. And I don't want to say being forced to happen, but you have to pivot. So can you just elaborate a little bit on the culture within that sort of mahogany table at the board there, and what prompted expedited decision making?
I think that probably it helped us that we had some people with that have leadership and lived experience working in community and social services to begin with, that were also on the front lines of the pandemic. So I think they also provided insight and wisdom at a governance level for them, saying, here's what we're experiencing in our day-to-day, versus the staff of the organization that we're leading saying the same thing. It required us to listen a little bit more deeply and say, okay, now we're going to need to pivot. In terms of some of the characteristics, I think we already had a lot of, we had a diverse group of people at the table working in a variety of sectors. And we just want to be responsive because we've been in a sector where there has been a lot of cuts to funding. So we've needed to pivot before. And so drawing on that ability to pivot when we frankly had a dearth of resources to now when we actually had a lot of resources because we're the gateway to community and social services. And we're fortunate to receive a lot of funding through the pandemic to provide support to people in need in Toronto. I think it was coming from a place of scarcity that we were actually able to deal with abundance, which is kind of ironic.
Yeah, good for you.
It was a great follow-up. Throwing us for a loop there, Geoff.
Sorry, I was just curious.
It's great.
I just find it fascinating.
Well, actually, for Geoff, and then for Tanya as well, too, I know we have one question that we've asked before, specifically more about marketing and just kind of how marketing messages change. But maybe Geoff, particularly with what you do, getting away from marketing, but more in terms of like the asks of clients that you work with or businesses that you work with. We kind of touched on how, you know, business models change. What has been like the sort of projects or initiatives or questions coming into you in terms of, is it about business model? Is it about maybe even just management of sort of the crises of COVID, and how do you kind of embrace but also brace for that? Or is it about kind of going forward and how do you readjust and pivot actually what you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it really depends on the culture at the leadership level. So I'm working with a few clients right now where, you know, we're looking at a transition plan, and it's not necessarily about pivoting the business as much as it's evolving the leadership team. I've seen, and this is a bit of a soft spot for me, like there's so many family-run businesses right now in Ontario, and, you know, it might be second gen, third gen, and they're just kind of like throwing their hands up and saying, you know, I don't know what to do, and my business might not necessarily be worth too much at this point. You know, let's just retire and sell the building. And it's sad because there's to me, there's a lot of opportunity to transition that business. You know, that being said too, that, you know, businesses that have unfortunately had to send a lot of people home, either temporarily or permanently, and then they really truly look at, okay, you know, where are we getting the greatest return on our time invested or our investment, and you know, should we be pivoting the business, or how do we pivot the business? So I really think it comes back to the leadership team, and quite honestly, how much gas is left in the tank, depending on the age and stage of the organization. But yeah, it's
Framing that a little bit differently, do either of you see any industry right now that would absolutely not have the need to make changes based off of recent events?
Amazon.
Yeah. Amazon. Yeah.
Well, I mean, even they you know, definitely made changes to be able to meet increased demand and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, they ramped up the nice direction, the nice way.
Yeah. But I mean, and that does happen. There are a lot of industries that were definitely, you know, positively affected by COVID.
Yeah.
You know, it's not all doom and gloom for everybody. But yeah, I mean, I'd be curious if you could think of an industry or a type of business in particular that, you know, could say, no, you know, we're going to just stay the course and do what we've always done, and this will be fine. You know?
No, I can't think of any. But I also think that like the pandemic just amplified the constant need for change anyways.
Yeah.
Whether it's a pandemic or some other external force that demands your attention to think about whether or not your practices and programs and offerings are responsive. I think it just amplified that. And I think anyone that thinks that they can stay the course, pandemic or not, I think is probably not going to be set up for the most amount of success. I think staying true to your values is important, but the way in which you operate and your ability to respond to external forces, I think, is something you'll always have to do.
That's also been something that's been magnified is, you know, from a audience perspective, I guess, if you want to put it that way, you know, where people who have their core values and maybe aren't sticking to it, you know, under duress, that's being amplified as well. So, you know, we're seeing a lot of people who have been, you know, towing a specific line or a specific voice for a very long time, and now the screws are being put to them, and it's go time, and a lot of people are not filling those shells, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I really have a tough time with that, because there's so many companies that have been doing the same thing for 30 years. And I don't want to say that they're fickle, but like, an opportunity comes up and they think they can monetize it, versus, to your point, staying the course, right? Like, stick to the core values. There was a company in Oakville, they sent everybody home for a couple months, paid leave. And they said, this is what we do. And yes, we'll look at pivoting our business, but we're not going over here because it's opportunistic.
Yeah.
So obviously you've got to be in, a strong financial position to be able to stay the course. But yeah, it's interesting.
Have you seen that from I was just going to position that to you as well, Tanya, like, because, from your vantage point, you're going to see a lot of, people or organizations putting their money where their mouth is, or not, in this time where it's like, okay, well, it's go time now. And you've said this, and you said you support this, and, how much do you support that? Because we really need it right now.
Absolutely. And I think charitable organizations that were already very focused on strategic philanthropy, not shiny thing over here, ice bucket challenge over here, special event over here, gala over here, were already doing well. The organizations that were truly capable of building deep, meaningful relationships with donors, whatever the capacity that donor has, whether it was digitally making a $25 a month donation through to those who are making $1 million gifts, to corporate partnerships. I think the charities that have been able to broker strategic philanthropic relationships are doing well now. And unfortunately, so many charitable organizations that, particularly in the health sector, that raise a lot of their money with events, are struggling to pivot those activities to online. I mean, if a lot of your funding is coming from offline, with whether it's bake sales and a-thons and things like that, really hard to recoup those dollars digitally. You can, some of it, a percentage of it, but it's really basically requiring them to revamp their whole organizational structure. A lot of the staff in the big charities that are working in community offices, their whole job would be to work on events year round, all the different a-thons that would take place. And that is going to seriously decimate the charitable sector. A lot of people will be out of work, and a lot of fundraisers will have to dig deep and figure out how to pivot into other forms of philanthropy and other ways of building relationships, because for the foreseeable future, people aren't interested in going to large scale events. Mm-hmm. And so how do you recoup those dollars and, again, continue to demonstrate that need while sticking to the core values? Like, if it's about connection and community and bringing people together, that can be done without risking people's health.
Yep. Well, we actually have a personal example of that. It's obviously it's small scale and it's narrative, but I think it's valid to the discussion, because we had Jet Propelled. We had our 5 Days for Good initiative that we started last year, where organizations dedicate 5 days to doing good things in the community. And last year we saw all kinds of things, from cleaning up parks and holding doors open for people, giving blood, and Fairweather Brewing adopted like 50,000 bees to help the bee population. Like, it was great, and then we were ready to run it back this year for our second year. And it was right when COVID hit, and we thought, oh man, we need this now more than ever, but how do we do this when we have a bunch of people who are not going to want to get together and do park cleanups, who are not going to want to, donate clothing and non-perishables because they're not being accepted, and all this other kind of stuff. However, to our wonderful surprise, we had 15 organizations participate last year, and we more than doubled it this year. We had participation from Hamilton Health Sciences, and of course CoMotion and the Hamilton Chamber, and a lot of other really wonderful organizations. And it threw me for a loop, because I was expecting this to be a hard road. People who are under duress and who are having a hard time and trying to figure all this out. I was thinking, you're asking drowning person to help you from or help other people from drowning, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure smaller community initiatives like that are going to be affected much differently than larger scale operations that you're dealing with. But I wonder if there's something that those larger organizations can take from, the operation of these small initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, look at the caremongering initiatives
100%.
that have been going on. I think that's so heartwarming to see that people just, creating Google Docs in their community and saying, so-and-so at this address needs someone to get their groceries for them, needs help getting to an appointment, those sorts of things. I think that is, grassroots community organization is we can always go back to those principles and how do we amplify those for larger things. And sometimes we just need to go back to basics. We've gotten really complex in my sector and probably yours too, Geoff. But if we remember sort of the tenets of why we're here and what drives us to do the work that we do, I think we can all probably be take from that and weather this storm, that we're not all, we don't all have the same resources, but we can all hopefully come out the other side equitably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we've got about 9 minutes left. Do we want to do wrap-up questions or final thoughts, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think that would be great. Yeah, I think if we could do just a few final points, maybe we'll start with Geoff, and then we'll move over to Tanya. If you guys have any just overarching thoughts as to if we could have one takeaway from this, over the past 5 months of experience, one thing that's really stuck out to you as being a positive influence or something like that would be wonderful. And then we can announce our next session. We've confirmed our speakers for that, so we can do that and sign off from there. So maybe we'll start with you, Geoff.
Yeah, so I think the most interesting thing for me, the most sort of paradoxical thing, when you have a global pandemic, if you compare this to 2008, for example, at the top of the pyramid, at the top of the triangle was all the power, and here it's all the frontline workers that I would say have all the power, the importance. They're the ones driving change. They're the ones keeping people safe. So for me, I think it was a video on LinkedIn that I had seen, but when you have macroeconomic challenges, normally the pyramid is this way, but I think within a global pandemic, you've got the inverse. So that was just a bit of an aha for me. And Tanya, talking about, the importance of, employees and managing work-life balance, I just think that the power has shifted a little bit, and it's comforting to see, especially, having a young family and, wanting to create flexibility in my life. Brad, I very much too like my house and my spouse and my little guys. So it's neat to be able to, go for a walk in the morning and have coffee and not be in a rush all the time. That was just the biggest aha for me. It's just a bit of a difference in, who the truly, I don't want to say important because everybody's important, but the truly impactful people or influential people throughout this pandemic are.
And I love that sentiment. And I feel like if I could add to it, I feel like it's here for us to fight to keep now.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Which I think is encouraging.
It's such a necessity. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And Tanya?
Yeah, I would say very similarly. I think that concept that I spoke about at the beginning of bringing your whole selves to work, whether it's paid or voluntary or community-based or in an office, I think this idea that people can be seen for all the dynamic things that they have going on in their life, all the things that they juggle, and have the empathy and grace to give them space to do work in the way that works for them and their family. As long as results are there and people are coming together and collaborating, getting the work done, if someone needs to get groceries in the middle of the day or take their dog for a walk or be with their family or attend to a sick loved one, I think that we need to continue to bring those practices forward. And I certainly don't want to see those go away. And then on the other hand, I'm also heartened that ultimately, when we think of, I worked during H1N1 in public health at the time. That was my first career. when we think about the measures that have been put in place for the pandemic from a health perspective, from a public health perspective, we're looking at population level health. We're not looking at, is each individual action going to protect Tanya? Is it going to protect Geoff? Is it going to protect Brad? Is it going to protect Ryan? No, it's for the greater good of the public. And so, if we can think a little bit more like that, with the sort of empathy to think about those most vulnerable, because ultimately a lot of these measures are intended to protect those most vulnerable people in long-term care, those with long-term or with underlying health conditions. Let's bring that forward. Let's bring that same level of care and community consciousness forward in wherever industry we work in. And also, let's also have recognition and gratitude for those working on the front lines, not just healthcare workers, but those working in grocery stores, making a minimum wage, which isn't a living wage.
It's not a livable wage. Yeah.
It's not. And so let's think about, next time there's, a conversation or a political debate where talking about any of those things, think about those people that were stocking our grocery stores and cleaning up our public transit system so that we can all use it safely. Nurses who are taking care of our loved ones who are, on ventilators during this pandemic. Let's just think about all those people that honestly we don't think about on a daily basis. And at 7 o'clock, all banging our pots and pans and thanking them. Let's not lose that and sort of go back to business as usual, because frankly, it is a new normal, and we are going to rely on people in those frontline positions, whether it's the Amazon guy delivering all the stuff we're ordering online, or the grocery worker, or the nurse, and teachers, and everything and everyone in between. So,
Yeah, and I think similarly to what Geoff had said, I think that all of these positive things are here and available for us to fight to keep right now. And I think being continuously mindful of that and not letting that slip is going to be critical. And that's why, personally, I hope that people get something out of these speaker sessions. I feel like we do them because we get so much out of them ourselves. Just love continuing the conversation and make sure that these conversations don't stop. Because it is a critical component in making sure that this change doesn't revert back to the way things were, at least the positive sentiments. So I appreciate that a great deal.
Yeah. Great.
To that point, I wanted to take a quick second to announce we're finally ahead of the game. And to that point, I'll take a little bit of that grace that you were talking about earlier, Tanya, because Ryan and I, we both work full time. Ryan's quite busy with Niagara Parks and CoMotion. I'm quite busy with Jet Propelled, and we're planning a big move with our family and all this other kind of stuff. So we try to facilitate these initiatives because we feel like there's value in them. In some cases we get a little bit behind on things that we try to put together, and we appreciate both you and Geoff rolling with the punches with us on this. And
Brad and Ryan bite off more than they can chew.
We do. Yeah, we definitely do.
Good for you.
But again, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know how you feel, Ryan, but I feel like, if all we can give is 90%, but it's going to get out there, then we'll do it.
80% go. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So we're doing the best we can. And we appreciate you guys giving us the grace that you were talking about earlier in being able to bring this stuff together and supporting us in this. And we appreciate you. But we're ahead of the game for once. And we have our panel picked out for the next session, which is August 11th, Tuesday, August 11th, from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern. We have Paula Govea, who is Vice President Academic at Cambrian College. We have April Theroux, who is the owner of Navigating Integrity Associates, and she specializes in sexual harassment in the workplace. So going to have an interesting discussion about how that has evolved with COVID, and probably be surprised to hear in which direction that's gone. And Stephanie Van Dam from Clydesdale Performance Management, Inc., who is authorized licensee of Sandler Training. She's wonderful. She's a huge part of our community, and she's involved in a lot of different initiatives and networking and that kind of thing as well. So it'll be really interesting to get her perspective on things. So this is officially going to be our first all-female panel, which we're very excited about, which will be very cool. And one other thing, if you don't mind, I'm just going to mention that currently at the moment, Jet Propelled has an initiative running called Takeover. We are all connected. Where we, it's similar to the Instagram takeover that happened a couple of years ago, where you would swap Instagram accounts with another business to reach another network, except this is an initiative to help support Black-owned businesses in our community. So we are doing this as a one-way takeover so that there's absolutely no question about the method or motive behind this. We're not trying to reach another audience ourselves. We're opening up our network to Black-owned businesses so that we can help integrate our networks more and generally just enhance the quality of all of our lives and our workflow. So if anybody does know about any Black-owned businesses that you think would be interested in participating, I would love to hear from you. We had Val Clark from Clark's Teas take over a couple weeks ago, and we have Lohifa, who has a hair salon locally as well, who is a force, and she's got the brightest, most enjoyable personality of anybody I think I've ever met in my entire life. And she's doing the takeover this coming Saturday. Love her to death. And so very excited about that. If anybody knows of anybody else who would be interested in participating, we want to keep that ball rolling. Again, keep these conversations going, keep our efforts going, and we'll all be better for it.
Awesome.
So again, thank you so much, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Tanya, so much for joining us. We appreciate you a great deal. Geoff, it's great to meet you as well. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time and your contribution to the conversation. And we will see everybody in 2 weeks on the 11th.
Yep. See you then. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. That was amazing.